Hi everyone, I'm Miranda Mirosa, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the alternative protein revolution. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen, and then I will get started. Okay, so I've got four key sort of sections to the talk. Firstly, I want to argue the importance or the need for food system transformation. I'm going to present some of the key international scientific recommendations on what this food system transformation is going to entail and how we need to get there. I'm then going to discuss some of the alternative protein market trends in this era of climate awareness, and then look specifically at some of the consumer insights into alternative proteins. So first of all, transforming our global food systems. The global food system falls far short of achieving our goals for our global goals for both health and the environment. In terms of people, we're facing both a malnutrition crises and an obesity health crisis. But it's not just people that are unwell. The health of our planet is increasingly coming into question as well. So currently our food system is a major cause of freshwater pollution, soil degradation, loss of biodiversity and so forth. And you can see on this slide the huge impact that the system is having on the planet. You know, we can see 26% of greenhouse gas emissions, for example, are from food. And I'm going to explore some of these impacts further in a moment. But what I wanted to do was just take a pause to think about, well, what do we want from our food system if it's not this? So we want a sustainable food system. But what is meant by that? You know, there's views as to what constitutes a sustainable food system and what falls within that scope of sustainability. And the definition I've got on this slide is quite a holistic one, and it encompasses a range of issues such as the security of the supply of health, food, health, safety, affordability, quality of strong food industry in terms of growth and jobs, and at the same time that environmental sustainability and so forth. So once we've got this common understanding of what a sustainable food system is, or I guess would provide, the next question is how do we get there? So in this part, I'm going to present some of the key international scientific recommendations on food system transformations. So the goal of the International Paris Climate Agreement, which was made in 2015, was to limit global warming to 1.5% above pre-industrial levels. So the in this report that's up on the slide here, you know, it says this race might be a lost cause unless land is used in a more sustainable and climate-friendly way. In this report, they sent out an authoritative call to action for food system transformation. Now, the panel, for example, says with high confidence that balanced diets featuring plant-based foods, such as those based on coarse grains, legumes, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, and animal-sourced food produce resilient, sustainable, and low greenhouse gas emission systems present major opportunities for adaptation and mitigation. The co-chair of the working group says, in the quote there on the right, "We don't want to tell people what to eat, but it would indeed be beneficial for both climate and human health if people in many rich countries consumed less meat and politics would create appropriate incentives to that effect." These calls for action from the IPCC were based on their examination of the estimated impact of CO2 emissions of the world's population, adapting to a variety of different diets. So you can see the results on this slide here in the bar chart, which was from an article which was published in Nature. So the modelling here shows that by 2050, dietary changes could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 8 billion tonnes per year relative to business as usual. And you can see the breakdown here of the different types of diets. So no animal product produced the biggest CO2 emission savings, vegetarian, including seafood, half the emission savings is no animal product, but still better than a moderate meat diet, etc. But in reality, arguably the savings from the dietary transformation are even bigger than that. And some scientists are suggesting that the IPCC has actually shied away from taking on sort of headfirst the farming industry by concentrating on just one of the two ways or alternative ways of counting the carbon cost of farming. So in the first way, the IPCC approach, this could be described as farming's current account. It considers how much greenhouse gas does things like activities on farm, things like driving tractors, spreading fertilizer, raising livestock, produce each year. So according to the panel's report, the answer is around 23% of planet heating gases that we currently produce. But this fails miserably to capture the overall impact of food production. So an alternative or second accounting method is arguably more important. This could be described as a capital account. So how does farming compare to the natural ecosystems that would have otherwise occupied the land? And in this paper published here in Nature sought to count this cost. So you can see the total carbon costs based on the carbon benefits index shows that a vegan diet offers by far the most opportunities for storing carbon in the land if it was not being farmed. And this, of course, produces an even stronger argument for reducing meat from our diets. Look, this need to significantly reduce animal-based products if we are going to keep our food system with environmental limits is really an idea that is now mainstream in the scientific community. This 2018 paper, also published in Nature, shows dietary recommendations for a healthy people and planet diet. And of note, I'm not sure if you can see that on the slide, it's perhaps a little bit small, but there are no minimum levels in this diet for sugar, palm, vegetable oil, meat, chicken, eggs, milk, and so forth. And where they are included, so there is, where maximums are included, these are really small. So, for milk, it's 250 grams per day per person, which is essentially one serving as a maximum. So this Eat Lancet Commission's report brought together 37 of the world leading scientists across the globe to answer the question, can we feed a future population of 10 billion with a healthy diet within planetary boundaries? And the scientists were tasked with using the best available evidence to determine a universal reference diet that was healthy for both people and planet. And this report was published in Lancet. And got picked up in international media around the world. What's different in this report are the steps that are outlined to put such a change in place. And it's been branded as what the authors call a great food transformation. And it outlines strategies that range from the least active in terms of simply sharing information to the most aggressive, which is eliminating consumer choice in some instances. Okay, so the scientists largely agree on the need for radical food system transformation. How is the market responding? So according to the Euromonitor Global Lifestyles Survey, eco-anxiety is affecting our shopping decisions. Really broadly, 60% of consumers are worried about climate change, 54% think that they can make a positive contribution with their purchases. And we can see here, interest in sustainable product peaking after the age of 30 in line with disposable income and earning potential. Interest in sustainable consumption higher among individuals with children and so forth. Let's look specifically at dairy for a moment. So the global dairy industry is undeniably being altered by the changing consumer lifestyles and priorities around protein. Our overall consumption of fluid milk is down. Dairy is profoundly impacted by the rise of these plant-based alternatives, which now make up 12% of global milk sales. These are traditionally soy-based, but increasingly derived from nuts and actually all sorts of other things. And they're continuing to steal market share and upend the industry as consumers' concerns around milk, the health impact and the environmental impact of milk consumption continue to grow. And we've really seen, I guess, plant-based milk's recent evolution from a rapidly growing sort of upstart sector to one with really widespread and mainstream appeal. And I'll show you some evidence of this on the next slide here. So just a case study of the US and some of the trends are happening in that space in this plant-based milk market. So these milks of alternative milks have grown 6% over the time period here and now make up 13% of the entire milk category. Meanwhile, cow's milk sales have declined 3% over the same period. And there's emerging plant-based dairy categories, which are, growing even faster. So plant-based yogurts, for example, up 39% in 2019 from the previous year, with dairy yogurt sales down 3%. Other categories, free from dairy ice cream, free from dairy cheese products, and even coffee creamers have also seen really promising development. Plant-based products are by far the fastest growing dairy food segment in the world. They are growing from a very small base, arguably, but there's massive growth. And there's some information there on the right of the slide in terms of who is buying this. And if we look at of all of the US households, 37% purchase plant-based milk. So and you can read the rest of it there for yourself. Okay, surely that's not happening in New Zealand, right? That's where I'm from. You will have all heard that New Zealand is the land of the dairy cow, but actually it is. If we turn our attention just for a moment to trends in New Zealand, we see similar patterns. So this market reports for both Australia and New Zealand show that the value of alternative milk market is growing 7.6% a year. Cow milk market is flat. There's lots of examples of alternative milks, on our supermarket shelves, and the range is increasing rapidly. Every time I go to the supermarket, there are new products available. And these alternative milks have really taken off in the last couple of years. 25% of total market share of all milk categories now. And most popular almond, followed by soy. Okay, but that's milk, you're thinking. Surely New Zealanders who live in a land that arguably produces some of the best animal protein that exists, meat protein meat that exists, and are not reducing our meat consumption as well. Well, actually, we are. This report was put out by Coleman Brunton, and shows it was a nationally representative study, shows that New Zealanders are reducing their meat intake. Interest in plant-based alternatives is gaining considerable momentum. Combined flexitarians, meat reducers make up a third of the New Zealand population. And in the last year, interest in eating less meat has grown. New Zealanders defined as flexitarian has grown by 18%. 24% of meat eaters have reduced their meat consumption. And baby boomers are leading this meat reduction trend, whereas vegetarians and vegans are most likely to be millennials. I've been talking about trends, but I tend to agree with this quote, actually, that rather than talking about market or consumption trends, what we really are witnessing is not really a trend. It's more than that. It's a massive disruptive shift in our consumption habits. And there are so many different forces which are shaping this disruption. We've got these are just some of them. These were outlined in a report commissioned by Beef and Lamb in New Zealand, which looked at the future of meat and how the red meat sector should respond to the alternative protein advances. And it's looking at some of these disruptions as the fact that now government and these global institutions have put the impact of meat consumption on the agenda. We're seeing this new set of influencers who are creating these new cultural narratives around meat. There's growing support for plant protein-based diets from the medical industry and so forth. So there's lots of forces at play here that are creating this disruption. I guess what we're seeing is the convergence of these different sort of forces all leading in the same direction, converging in the same direction, which is creating this massive disruption. In New Zealand, we're seeing sort of new sector groups or networks like this one here emerge. This is an emerging protein network. The goal of this network is to share knowledge and work together on common projects to help New Zealand capitalize on opportunities in this globally exploding sort of emerging protein food category. And you can see the network here defines emerging proteins as including quite a wide range of protein sources, so plants, fungi, insects, bacteria, and cell culture. And actually, if we just carry on with this sort of definitional side of things for a moment, broadly, these alternative proteins are generally categorized in this way here that I've got up on the slide, so which is how the Good Food Institute, for example, defines them. And I think it's useful to keep this in mind as I move forward into the next section now on consumer insights. Given that consumers don't greet all alternative proteins with the same level of acceptance. Actually, I'll just go back. So I think alternative proteins are going to become if alternative proteins are going to become a reality in terms of being a major part of our food system, people have to choose to consume them. So narratives around these products are going to need to be tailored for different audiences who have different motivations for consuming them. I think a key part of understanding acceptance of alternative proteins is firstly understanding what is actually motivating consumers to move away from meat or from moving away from traditional protein sources. So this is a paper we wrote a couple of years ago now, which analysed data from a large nationally representative survey that used the theory of plant behaviour and meat attachment questionnaire to look at New Zealanders or New Zealand consumers' attitudes, motivations, and behaviours in regards to meat consumption. So we also explored potential drivers for its reduction as well. I'm just going to focus on the motivations for meat reduction just for a moment. So on your slide here, you can see the different strength of motivations for meat reduction and how these differ depending on individuals' current meat eating habits. So we looked at 3 groups of consumers. We looked at standard consumers who have a sort of standard meat diet. We looked at people that are actively reducing their meat consumption and abstainers. And what we found is they all seem to have differing priorities when it comes to the reduction of meat. So high cost of meat and health concerns were really key motivators for sort of standard consumers and reducers. For abstainers, there was more sort of ethical motivations, so things like animal welfare concerns and environmental friendliness. These were really important motivators, while those other motivators, health concerns, taste preferences, and etc., played a much smaller or much more minor role. But of course, in addition to studying meat or traditional protein source reduction motivations and initiatives, it's also important to focus our study more specifically on the key determinants of choice for alternative proteins. So what I've done on this slide is I've grouped a whole range of influencing factors that are documented in the quite wide-ranging literature in this space, according to the sort of key determinants of food choice, like psychological, structural, social, cultural, intrinsic, extrinsic product characteristics, biological, and physiological factors. And I don't have time to go into all of these, obviously, but I think the slide serves as a useful sort of reminder of how complex consumer decision-making around alternative proteins can be. If you want to know more about some of these individual factors, this is a paper which has just been put out recently, which looks at consumer acceptance of alternative proteins. It's a systematic review looking specifically at acceptance. So they look at drivers of acceptance, 5 different types of proteins, which are listed there in the title of the paper. The review demonstrates that acceptance of alternative proteins is relatively low compared to that of meat. If we look at the acceptance of the different proteins, acceptance of insects is the lowest, followed by the acceptance of cultured meat, which is also really low. At the other end, pulses and plant-based alternative proteins have the highest level of consumer acceptance. In general, there are a number of drivers of acceptance which shows that are consistently to be relevant for the different types of alternative proteins. These are motives of taste and health, familiarity, attitudes, food neophobia, disgust, and social norms. What's really important in this paper is they show that there are differences in the relative importance of those motivators between individuals, as well as in between the different types of alternative proteins. My own research team is just embarking on this journey of studying specifically acceptance of alternative proteins. We're currently working as an example on a project that's exploring the Chinese consumers' perceptions and preferences for these alternative proteins. So we're doing some in-market survey research to elicit a broad range of determinants that influence consumption of these proteins. We're going to supplement this with some ethnographic qualitative work to help us understand that really complex interplay of those determinants in the real world. And then we're going to use some biometric behavioral technologies to further our understanding around some of the neuropsychophysiological responses that drive individuals' preferences and decision-making for alternative proteins, which are going to allow us to essentially produce more effective communications of product offerings and communications to different consumers in this market. In conclusion, science shows clearly that fundamental food system transformations are required, and that this is going to require a highly coordinated and committed global, national, and local response. Business as usual isn't viable, and an urgent response to climate change is required. And alternative proteins are going to play an absolutely key role in these transitions. Given the importance of transitioning to more sustainable diets, we really need, as a scholarly community, to better understand why consumers might be or might not be willing to consume these alternative proteins, and then how we can use this knowledge to develop interventions to make the case, or to increase consumer acceptance of these products. Given that this is fundamental to transitioning this food system to one which is healthier for people and for the planet. And with that, I will leave it there. Thank you for your attention.